Welcome to another session of Dentistry and More. We'll be continuing with the oral medicine and radiology question paper discussion. So today's topics that will be discussed are the dental caries, pulp and periapical lesions, gingival and periodontal diseases, systemic disorders and their clinical implications. So under the topic of dental caries and pulp and periapical lesions, the first question that can be asked is about the dentoalveolar abscess. So as the abscess, which means a localized collection of pus in an alveolar bone at the root apex of the tooth, which is caused due to the death of the pulp or necrotic pulp with an extension of the infection through the apical foramen which reaches into the periradicular tissues. So the cause can be due to any trauma, carious lesion, as well as any chemical or mechanical irritation that can be attrition, or even in cases of fracture cases also you can see such pathology such as that of the dentoalveolar abscess. The symptoms that is observed by this patient is a severe throbbing pain. There is a swelling of the soft tissue as well as inflammation around that surface due to the accumulation of pus, and also patients can exhibit loss of sleep as also loss of appetite. Also there is a rise in temperature and fever. And what can be seen clinically is a diffuse or well-defined swelling that can be observed within the alveolar mucosa, and it is found to be there might be also sinus drainage that can be noticed in chronic lesions, whereas in the acute it will be an erythematous exophytic kind of a swelling that is seen mainly around the alveolar mucosa, or it can be extending till the attached gingiva. So the treatment for such cases is that we do abscess drainage followed by root canal treatment, or else if it is a grossly decayed tooth we undergo extraction. Next question that has been asked is the chronic suppurative osteomyelitis. It is defined as an inflammation of the soft tissue components of the bone, which includes the bone marrow, Haversian canals, as well as the periosteum, due to the secondary changes of any mineralized components of the bone. So it is found to be a sequelae of the acute suppurative osteomyelitis. Most commonly affects the posterior part of the mandible. So the patient exhibits mild or a dull aching kind of a pain, and also there is swelling around the affected site, and you can see there is an infiltration towards the, or a fistula formations can be seen in such cases, which can lead to the sequestrum which can protrude through the ulcerated skin. And in radiographic features it's found to be having a ragged borders or ill-defined radiolucency with a radio-opaque sequestra formation that are seen. And treatment protocol is nothing other than antibiotics have been prescribed based on their bacterial culture and sensitivity, and saucerization of the bone has been done. This is how it is seen in the maxilla. You can see that there is an infiltration of the skin or an ulceration around the region of interest. You can see that the alveolar bone has been exposed within pus exudate that has been accumulated around. And in such cases you can see that the patient exhibits a swelling of the tooth of interest. Next question to be asked is onion skin radiographic appearance, or an onion peel appearance that has been observed. It is caused due to the reaction of the bone due to inflammation, and the periosteum grows layer by layer, which depicts the onion peel. It's most commonly seen in conditions such as that of Gary's osteomyelitis, Evick's sarcoma, eosinophilic granuloma, and Caffey's disease. The next question to be asked is about the differential diagnosis of periapical radioopicities. So once this question has been asked, you can refer the textbook Langland and Lanley when in the chapter in the chapter of periapical radioopicities. In the textbook that is the diagnostic imaging of the jaws, they have beautifully described about it in this chapter of periapical radioopicities. So you can explain each of these conditions, that is condensing osteitis, then followed by idiopathic osteosclerosis, hypercementosis, periapical cemental dysplasia, cementoblastoma, as well as ossifying fibroma. So you can explain based on what are these conditions, what are the causes, that is etiopathogenesis, followed by the clinical features, and the radiographic features must be highlighted so that you can differentiate from one condition to the other. Next question to be asked is radiographic features of the osteomyelitis. So normally in the first phase that is seen as the acute phase, in that you can see there is a bone destruction that has been seen along with localized osteopenia, and the trabecular destruction is seen in the early signs of the acute process. Followed by, in the chronic lesions, you can see that there is a solitary radiolucency which is found to be irregular, which is confined to irregular multiple radiolucencies within irregular borders, and there is also laminated periosteal reaction. And in the first acute suppurative osteomyelitis phase, you can see a moth-eaten appearance, followed by, when it comes to chronic suppurative osteomyelitis, it is found to be having an ill-defined or ragged borders with a sequester or radiopacity that has been seen. And along that, you can see the reparative phase where there is an endosteal and also periosteal newborn formations, which is surrounded by sclerosis. So this question has also been asked, which I've explained previously, that is the radiographic appearance of chronic suppurative osteomyelitis. You see 4 different patterns, that is ill-defined radiolucencies in the bone with ragged borders. Then this second type is the radiolucency with multiple radiopaque foci, which later structures, this later radiopaque foci is found to be the sequestra. Then you have the dense zone of radio opacities with a faint radiolucency at the margin, and then you have the next appearance, that is a salt and pepper appearance within the bone. Next question to be asked is about periapical radiolucencies. Again, this has been explained in diagnostic imaging of the jaws by Langdon and Langley, where they have a chapter based on that periapical radiolucencies. So you can enlist the periapical radiolucencies of the condition that you see under this, that is periapical granuloma, radicular cyst, periapical abscess, surgical scar, median mandibular cyst, traumatic bone cyst, and the periapical cemental dysplasia. So in periapical cemental dysplasia, that is the initial stage, you see a periapical radiopacity, and then the mature stage you see the periapical radiopacity is observed. So you have to highlight about each of these conditions, how they appear radiographically, so that you can distinguish or differentiate from one from the other. Next chapter is about gingival and the periodontal diseases. Under this, the question that has been asked is the drugs that are causing gingival enlargement. So we have to enlist the drugs, that is under anticonvulsants you have the phenytoin, diazepam, carbamazepam, and then you have immunosuppressants such as that of cyclosporin, and calcium channel blockers such as nifedipine, verapamil, and diltiazem. Again, the similar question that has been asked is about the drug-induced gingival enlargement. You can enlist the drugs that are causing the gingival enlargement, and then it's most commonly seen affecting the anterior gingiva, and most commonly seen around the younger age. The onset occurs within the 3 months of usage of any of these medications, which involves interdentally, and you can see that there's a beaded-like gingival enlargement that is seen in the interdental papilla as well as the marginal gingiva. In severe cases, it might also cover up the whole occlusal surface of the tooth, so which can interfere with the occlusion. So the next chapter is about the systemic disorders and the clinical implications. So the question that can be asked is about the dental and the oral health consideration in an asthmatic patient. These are the enlisted points, that is the do's and the don'ts of what are supposed to be done for treating an asthmatic patient. So you can go for a fluoride supplementation for those who are under beta 2 agonist medications. You can instruct the patient to rinse the mouth with water after using the inhalers, and then schedule the appointments for late morning or later in the day to minimize any asthmatic attack. Antifungal medications can be prescribed in patients or inhalational corticosteroids. Steroid prophylaxis can be advised for long-term systemic corticosteroids. Then the use of reducing stress, such as that of conscious sedation, can be performed without the bronchoconstrictors, such as that of hydroxyzine, and nitrous oxide can also be used in mild cases. These are all the do's or the what all can be considered for an asthmatic patient. Whereas the contraindications or what you're not supposed to do are mentioned under the don'ts, that is barbiturates and narcotics have been avoided. Avoid any antihistamines also, so as to avoid any xerostomia cases, as also increase the formation of mucus within the acute attack if it occurs. And also dental materials such as that of methyl methacrylate can precipitate as an asthmatic attack, so you have to avoid such materials. And any drug interactions with the theophylline is found to be should be avoided, such as that of macrolide antibiotics also, and tetracyclines must be avoided. And also they say that you are supposed to avoid aspirin as well as NSAIDs agents, as it might cause any allergic reactions. So these are the enlisted points that you have to mention under this question. The next question that can be asked is the dental or the oral health considerations for patients undergoing dialysis. Carl and Wood has stated that the dental treatment should be performed first before hemodialysis, and the few other authors that have mentioned is about the treatment should be timed so that the effects of the dialysis can be present. That is 12 hours post dialysis. And patient who is undergoing periodic tests for hepatitis infectivity and HIV antibody should be done. And also clinical and laboratory investigations such as that for any anemia, bleeding disorders and leukocyte disorders, that is WBCs, must be checked. And then you have to evaluate and stabilize the fluid and electrolyte balance before the treatment. Patients under dialysis, antibiotic prophylaxis should be done prior to the dental care. Even topical antifungal agents can be recommended. Modify the usual dosage regimen, that can be a necessity. And then NSAIDs can be avoided in such cases, and avoid cocaine as it has been contraindicated. So the next question that has been asked is the dental and the oral health considerations for pregnant patient. First and foremost, you should keep a good rapport with the patient as to reduce the anxiety, and also have a detailed medical history along with the consultation from the obstetrician or the gynecologist. And then you have to monitor the vital signs and the blood examination vigilantly. And if the patient is in the third trimester, you have to follow the position, that is a left lateral position, so as to avoid any supine hypotensive syndrome. Always keep short appointments. And in case of pregnant patients, it's always best to take the radiographs around in the second trimester. You have to follow the preventive program to develop a healthy oral environment, and prenatal fluoride is around 2.2 mg per day, which is being prescribed for second and the third trimester. And in the second trimester, as I've already mentioned, is the safest period for any elective dental treatments to be done. Next question that can be asked is about the antibiotic prophylaxis in infective endocarditis. Under this, you can see the table format that has been mentioned. For patients who are not allergic to penicillin, we can prescribe 2 grams of amoxicillin 1 hour before the procedure. And if the patient is allergic to penicillin, the other alternative that has been prescribed is the 600 milligrams of clindamycin 1 hour before the procedure. And also, you can prescribe azithromycin or clarithromycin 1 hour prior to the procedure. In children who are not allergic to penicillin, 50 milligrams per kilogram weight amoxicillin is being prescribed 1 hour prior to the procedure. Next tabulative form is about prescribing how to be given for administered for intramuscular or an intravenous administration. So how much is being dosage that is being prescribed for patients who are adults not allergic to penicillin. 2 grams of ampicillin is being prescribed 30 minutes before the procedure. If it is patients who are allergic to penicillin, 600 milligrams of clindamycin is being prescribed intravenously half an hour before the procedure. And then for children who are not allergic to penicillin, we prescribe 50 milligrams per kilogram weight of ampicillin intramuscularly or intravenously half an hour before the procedure. Next question that can be asked is about multiple myeloma. It is nothing other than a malignant neoplasm of the plasma cells, which is found to be appearing multicentric in origin within the bones. And the clinical features that have been seen in such cases is the anemia, there is thrombocytopenia, leukopenia, pallor, fatigueness, and secondary infections can be notified. And also there is bleeding tendency, bone pains due to the pressure of the tumor, and pathological fractures. So when you're taking any investigations, you notice there is a Bence-Jones proteins that have been excreted in the urine in these cases. The oral manifestation that is seen in multiple myeloma is that there is macroglossia, there is gingival and soft tissue enlargement, along with that there is tooth mobility and there is jaw pain. Radiographic features that are seen is the punched out lesions are seen, that is the sharply demarcated lytic lesions without any reactive sclerosis. and the treatment is nothing other than chemotherapy that has been done. This also has been discussed earlier. The question that can be asked is a Plummer-Vinson syndrome. The other name is Patterson-Kelly syndrome, and the etiopathogenesis is found to be iron deficiency can lead to this condition. And also there's possible factors such as that of malnutrition, genetic predisposition, as well as autoimmune processes. The clinical features that are seen is the dysphagia resulting from esophageal stricture. There's iron deficiency, anemia, and also there is pallor, that is lemon tinted pallor, along with dryness of the skin. Spoon shaped fingers, that is koilonychia, is seen, and also splenomegaly. The oral manifestation that are seen in Plummer-Vinson is that there is atrophic glossitis, angular cheilitis, there is thinning of the vermilion border of the lips, and also leukoplakia of the tongue. So the treatment protocol is nothing other than iron supplementation has been prescribed. Next question that can be asked is role of steroids in oral medicine. First and foremost, when you're trying to formulate such an answer, you should start off what are corticosteroids and then give the classification of glucocorticoids, and then followed by what are the uses of these steroids. That is, it's used in conditions such as that of aphthous ulcers, such mostly in major aphthous ulcers, then followed by Beckett's disease, lichen planus. There is also erythema multiforme, pemphigus vulgaris, then for central giant cell granuloma, hemangioma, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, post-herpetic neuralgia, and Bell's palsy. So all these conditions, you have to start off, like as I said, what is corticosteroids, then the glucocorticoids, what are the classification, mechanism of action, and then you have to mention about the uses of this. Next is about the oral manifestations seen in renal diseases patients. So these are the enlisted clinical features that are seen orally infected. There is erythematopultaceous stomatitis, then hyperkeratosis and generalized pallor. There is also poor taste perception, uremic stomatitis. There are secondary infections also seen in such cases, metallic taste, and also when seen radiographically, you will see there is peripheral giant cell lesions, and also xerostomia due to the decreased salivary flow. Next question that can be asked is about the dental consideration for patients with diabetes mellitus. You can refer Burkitt's Oral Medicine itself. In that, they have mentioned about a tabulated form of how to go about for patients in diabetes mellitus cases. Local anesthetic without epinephrine has been prescribed for such cases, so as to when there is a minimal dose of epinephrine, they can elevate glucose concentration and also can lead to dry socket. Then there is also complicated dental procedures are supposed to be delayed in uncontrolled diabetes, and prophylactic antibiotic can be prescribed for such cases. The routine dental treatments can be performed based on the glucose levels, blood glucose levels, when they are under control. Next question that can be asked is the Bell's palsy. It's nothing other than lower motor neuron disease of the facial nerve, and the clinical features are found to be they have an abrupt onset, unilateral facial weakness, numbness or pain around the ear or on an affected side, and also there's reduction in taste, alteration on the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. Then there's drooping of the corner of the mouth or the lip, there's due to which there will be drooling of the saliva, followed by loss of facial creases. Also there is hypersensitivity to sounds, inability to close the eyes, and there is tearing also seen in such cases. And then treatment that has been prescribed is a prednisolone 40 to 60 milligrams daily for a week, and also due to tearing due to excessive tears, artificial tear substitutes have been prescribed, and then facial exercises have been done, that is through physiotherapy. With this, we come to an end of this topic discussion. Good day to all.